Trophy Bow here. Welcome to join in my video series about traditional archery. And this is part 2, where I explain what type of traditional bows there are, what are those differences, how you recognize them, and what are the differences when you shoot. Understanding of the structure of the bow and how they feel and what are the differences, that is quite important to understand before you start really practicing archery, because there are different techniques which are better for another bow and different techniques for another. About the types of the bow, I will keep it really simple. I'm not gonna go very deeply in each category, because under each category there are many different shapes, different models and variations, and it would take too much time and you probably would be more confused than I am. So let's keep it simple and I will explain it really how I see them. Before I start, I apologize, my English is not so great, but I'm doing my best and I try to explain same things that I explained in Finnish version of this video. So please be patient, I hope you understand at least something. Excuse me those flying objects there. So I know there is a lot of English material available in these same subjects too, and in Finnish there are not too much material available, so my main goal is to make this video series in Finnish, but I'm going to make it in English too, because of you guys who are willing to follow my channel in other parts of the world too. So greetings to all my friends and welcome to join. Let's start. At first I will tell you quickly the structure of the bow. And let's take this longbow for an example. So the limbs. Limbs are those parts which are bending when you shoot, and they give the bow power and speed to the arrow. Upper limb and lower limb. Then the opposite side from you when you shoot. This here, this is the back of the bow, and the same side as you are against your own belly, that's the belly of the bow. So back and belly of the bow. At the end of the limbs there are limb tips, and on the tip there is this groove. It is called string groove, where you put the string loop on when you string the bow. In horse bows, I will explain them later. In horse bows, the tips, if there are bigger and stiff, hard wood or bone, it is called siah. Okay, then in the middle part of the bow is the handle section. If the bow is takedown model, which means that you can put the bow in pieces, and if it's a 3-piece bow, then the handle section, the middle part, is called as a riser. In 2-piece takedown models, you can separate the bow in the middle, so there is no riser. And in the handle section there's different kind of grips. Actually there are 3 types of grips. It is a low grip and high grip, also as called as pistol grip, and then the primitive grip. The low grip handle means that when you shoot the bow, you kind of push the bow forwards against the target with your bigger part of the palm of the hand, and your wrist is then in low position. That's the name. This longbow has low wrist grip, so when you shoot you hold it like this. I will explain these different techniques later in my series, where I tell you more about shooting styles and techniques, but this is just good to know at this point that there are 3 types of grips. Okay, that was the low. Then the high wrist grip meant that the wrist is high, and the grip is also called as a pistol grip. And here is one certain of pistol grip. So you see it is more shaped, and this can be a lot of deeper, and the angle of this part can be different, but it all supports your grip to be high wrist. So when you shoot, it is easier to keep your wrist straight and high. Then above the grip section in modern longbows and recurve bows, there are usually the window cutting. It's called a window, and the purpose of this is to put the arrow more to the center line of the bow when you shoot. So that's why the arrow doesn't need to go around the bow. It is easier to make it fly straight without any fishtail movements. And this is also a thing that I will talk you later more when we speak about tuning the bow and tuning the arrow. But in this point, it's good to know that this is window cutting, and on the bottom of the window cutting there's this part of the bow, and that is an arrow shelf. So window, and on the bottom there's arrow shelf where you put the arrow on. This also means that usually these bows are only meant to be shot with one side. So right-handed archer usually use the window on the left of the bow, and left-handed archer usually wants the window on the right side of the bow if they shoot with Mediterranean release. Let's talk them later. Then the primitive type of grip. In horse bows there are always the primitive type of grips because of the rules of horseback archery. That means that the grip is simplest possible grip, and there is not allowed to be any window cuttings, and especially no arrow shelves or arrow rests. Arrow rest means that if you put a separate arrow shelf into the bow by screwing it or by gluing it, that's arrow rest, and the window cutting and the permanent shelf is just an arrow shelf, but no arrow shelf in primitive type grips. So low wrist grip, high wrist grip, as also called as a pistol grip, and then the primitive type grip. Then of course every bow has a string. It's hard to shoot arrows without the string. Nowadays strings are made of small and thinner strands, and there are usually from 12 up to 18 small strands in the string, which are wrapped around as one single string. At the end, both ends of the string, there are the string loops which you put on the string groove, as I told before. In middle part of the string, this is serving, and it is also a separate strand wrapped around tightly in this part, and that is because it protects this actual string. You see, when you knock the arrow and you shoot a lot, it can make damages to the actual string, so that's why there is a serving. And almost every archer are using a knocking point in this serving. This is metal, this is brass or something what you can put on with a tool, but you can also make them by yourself with other strand making a knot and wrapping around and then put a little bit glue on, or put a tape or something. There are many kind of ways how to make a knocking point, but the purpose of this knocking point is that you always put your arrow exactly on the same spot to the string. It is really important for accuracy, of course, and preventing the arrow make this movement during the flight. So if it's tuned correctly, the arrow goes straight in this way. Also, when you shoot fast, for example in horseback archery, we need to shoot a rapid fire. It is good to have very solid and quite big knocking point to make it fast reloading and knocking easier. So quickly, limbs: upper limb, lower limb, back and belly of the bow, tips or siyahs, handle section, where is 3 different type of grips. There are low wrist, high wrist and primitive type of grips. Above there is a window cutting and arrow shelf. And in primitive grips there are no arrow shelves. So when you shoot with primitive grip, the arrow rests on your hand and it can be also shot one side or another. That's a good thing to know, that one bow you can shoot right-handed, left-handed and different type of techniques, which I tell you later. So let's move on. So how I see these all traditional bows, I see them in 3 basic categories. There are longbows, recurves and horse bows. I know this is very simple, but this is how I put them in my mind. In longbow section, that means all longbow types of bows, meaning even the English longbow, I talk you that later, then the flat bows, American longbows, and also those shorter ones which are shaped similar way than longbows. Then in recurve category, I see the hunting and competition recurves, as called as modern recurves. And then in horsebow section, there are many different type of horsebows. Most of them are quite similar than recurve bows, but there are also similar type of bows than flat bows or long bows. They are just short. I will explain them later. So these are the main sections, how I see them. And how and why I put them that way, it's the shape of the bow. And also the feeling when you shoot. The length of the longbow is from 64 inches and up to the 68 or 70 inches. That's the basic length. There can be, of course, shorter longbows too. It depends of the association where you are competing. There are plenty of rules, and what they are talking about is the length. So what is the shorter possible length of the longbow class? And then the other subject, for example, is that how center shot the longbow can be. So they speak about the depth of the window and the length of the bow. But never mind that, it's quite a messy thing at first, but just basically longbows are longbows, and easiest way to separate them from recurve bows are this string. So when the string is on, the string is not touching the limb. That separates longbows from recurve bows. Length and this string, which is not touching the limb surface. Then the recurves. Unfortunately, I don't have a modern hunting recurve or modern competition recurve now, but this horsebow Samick SKB, this is good example of the basic recurve shape, and you see the name comes from this recurve. So when you shoot, the limb is curved opposite way from you. And notice the string, it is really touching quite long way of the surface of the limb. The basic modern recurves in hunting and competition, they are almost as long as these modern longbows. They are from 60 inches up, and they can be even close to 70 inches long. They seem to be shorter than longbows, but it is because the shape and the measurement what makes it different. The length of the bow is measured from tip to tip along surface of the back of the bow. So because it is shaped, it seems shorter, but it can be almost as long as these straighter sisters or brothers. All modern longbows and recurves, the handle sections are still the same. So there can be still those 3 different type of grips, and there are the window cuttings. The modern competition longbows are totally different. There are metal risers, they are takedown bows, and then they use a lot of devices to help aiming and shooting accurately. There are clickers and sights and all kind of weight devices to make it steady to shoot. That's whole totally different than traditional basic archery and shooting. But those are the basic differences between longbows and recurves. Then the horsebows, they are short. They are usually closer to 50 inches what comes to the length. So as the longbows were from 64 inches and higher usually, and the recurves were from 60 inches and higher, then usually the horsebows are around 50 inches and a little bit higher. The longest horsebows are typically 56 or 58 inch long, but usually there are 50 inches or 52 inches or even 48 inches long. The reason is of course because you need to handle the bow very functionally and effective from horseback. You need to shoot forward, backwards, down, up, even the opposite way, even sometimes change the hand. So that's why it needs to be in handy length. And the second thing, like I mentioned before, in horsebows the grip is always primitive type of grips. Of course there are some differences in shapes, and there can be also this this good grip, it's like a cork or rubber, but still, as you can see, there is no window cutting and no arrow shelf. It's a primitive type of grip, and this is a horsebow, Korean style horsebow. The third thing in horsebows, usually most of the horsebows has some certain type of siach. The siach is the tip part of the limb, and it is not bending. It is hard and stiff wood or bone typically. It works like a lever arm. There are many sizes. They can be longer, shorter, thin like this, or thick, and a lot of different type of siachs. But the purpose of it is the lever arm thing. So usually in horsebows this limb is shorter than these other bows, and when they put this siah on, it gives more length to the archer, because the short limb doesn't bend too much, and if there is no this lever arm, draw length what you can pull from the bow is short. In North America, the Native Americans, they used on horseback short bows. They looked similar and they were shaped like longbows and flat bows, but they were short. And that's why, because they didn't use siahs, the draw length of those bows were really short. It could be only 21 inches or 24 inches. And these eastern type of horse bows, it can be more than 30 inches draw length. So horse bow, it is short, somewhere in 50 inches. The grip is primitive type grip. Even if it's a takedown model, it has to be always primitive type of grip. And usually there are siahs at the end of the limbs. Horsebow models, there are plenty different horsebow models, and why? It is because there were a lot of different cultures in history which used bows from horseback for warfare or for hunting. Usually the nomads in east side of the world, and also the North American natives. Nowadays they still make kinds of replica models of those bows from each different cultures, and that's why there are, for example, Hungarian bows, Turkish bows, Ottoman bows, Scyth, Assyrian, Mongol, Korean, Han, and so on. Lot of different type of horse bows, and there are different shapes in the handle section, in the limbs and siah sections, and the size section. All are horse bows. We can come back in this subject later too. Most important thing to understand the structure and the differences of these each traditional bow sections, what I'm talking about. That is how you can tune your equipments correctly in later, and that is how you can choose the correct technique how to shoot with different type of bows, because it is important to use right type of techniques to make the bow effective. That is what we are going to talk later in other parts of this video series. Now that we know the structure and differences, we go into a more important thing, and that is how they feel when you shoot. Let's start again with the longbow. Because of the limbs are straight and long, the feeling when you start pulling the bow is that it is first, move a little bit, it is first quite easy to pull back, and then when you are close to full draw, there comes a wall. It is stacking a little bit. It feels that you cannot pull it further. And then when you release, it kicks a little bit. It feels in your bow hand quite snappy, more or less. And that is why, because the limb is quite straight and it bends as long as it can, and at the same time the swing angle is changing like this, and when it's big enough, this angle, it just cannot be pulled back without breaking the bow. Well, nowadays the material is so good that modern type of bows you cannot usually break it by your hands, but in primitive bows those who are making the self bows and the primitive bows nowadays from traditional materials too, the breaking of the bow is really one matter what they try to avoid. So in recurve, when you pull back, you see how the limb is opening on full draw. It's opening like this, and that gives you more draw length, of course, even in shorter bows, and also that makes the feeling here in full draw softer, so there is not such a wall and stacking what comes in longbow type of bows and flat bows. And also when you release and the string goes forward and it goes around a bit together with the limb, that is making the feeling in your bow hand softer too, so there is no too much of kicking. So you could say it is more comfortable to shoot with recurves. But the more important thing what comes the differences between longbows and flat bows and between recurves is the accuracy. You see, longbows are easier to shoot accurate way than recurves. That is because longbows are more forgiving. What that means is that if we take this recurve, the limb is wider and thinner, and it is soft because what I just explained. It is soft this way, but usually recurves are also softer torsionally, so the limb is bending this way too very easily. And then if you make some kind of mistake when you release with your fingers or hand, the mistake movement is reflected to the string movement, and through the string it affects to the limb movement and of course to the arrow flight. So little mistake here affects to the arrow flight, arrow pass. Usually the arrow makes the fishtail movement. Instead, in longbows, where the limbs are more narrow and thicker this way, it is harder torsionally too. So the limb is bending backwards and forwards, not torsional way, even if you make some mistakes here in release. And that's why the arrow always flies more straight and the arrow pass is cleaner. That is why longbow is easier to shoot accurately at first. Of course, modern materials in recurves too are making the limb more stiffer, and if you learn how to shoot well and your release is really clean, then there is not so much difference in this matter, but still this is how it is. What comes to the structure of longbow and recurve bows, there are also some kind of mixtures of these two different bows, and they are called as a hybrid bow or reflex deflex bow. And that means the shape of the limb is actually not quite of recurve bow and not quite of longbow. It is somewhere between, and usually they are shorter bows than the basic modern longbows. They are used mostly among bow hunters for hunting and that kind of shooting. So the hybrid bow, it has some good benefits from longbow world, for example the torsional strength, and also there are some benefits of recurve bows, so the smooth draw and the fast arrow flight and the softer feeling when you shoot. So those are hybrid bows, but that's just a kind of a side comment. In horse bows, the structure, which is short but gives still big and long draw length, that makes the string angle quite high, meaning this angle. And you have to understand that if you want to shoot with 3 fingers with short horse bows, it can squeeze your fingers together, and that makes the release a little bit unclean. It is sometimes a little bit harder to make clean release with 3 fingers. That is one reason why they use thumb release in shooting with horse bows. Of course, there are many other reasons too for thumb release, but that is one reason. That means that only thumb is pulling the string, and then it doesn't matter how big this angle is. It is still very clean when you shoot with thumb. And then the bigger the sias are, the more it makes kicks to the handle section, but that's another story then. The most important is understand that if the bow structure is like in long bows and the limb is not bending torsionally, it is easier to shoot accurately and it forgives your mistakes here. And in short horse bows with long draw length, it is harder to make clean release with finger release. Of course, one thing is that the bigger the bow is, it weighs more and it's a little bit more steady to shoot what comes to accurate shooting. But in the other hand, the lighter and shorter horse bows, there are I don't know what is the correct word, but most multifunctional bows, meaning that you are able to shoot both handed, different sides from the bow. You can use many different techniques with the same bow. You can also hunt and shoot some of those basic competitions too, together with the other traditional bows, but usually in own class, horsebow class. Shortly, a little bit of history too, which is good to know at least. Old days in history, they were different kind of primitive bows. That means nowadays the bows which are made in natural materials, they used wood, they used horn, they used sinew, they used animal glues to glue on those different parts, and they used also a bone in some parts of the bow. Nowadays people still are making those primitive bows in primitive materials, and that's good hobby for them. If we look back in history, there are primitive bows, and the horse bows were also in the same periods of time. Of course, first was primitive bows, and then after the horses came in the picture and people started to ride them and shoot from horseback, then those primitive bows were used in horseback. At that changed a little bit the structure of the bow. If we look to the east side of the world, those cultures made usually composite bows, meaning that they often used horns in this limb section. Because horns are very strong and bending, they used horns or wood and horn in this side, but those horns wasn't too long. So that's why they started to use the sias as lever arms here. So it was easier to pull back the hard horn section, and that gave more arrow length to the archer, and of course maybe it gave also a little bit more speed to the arrow because it worked like the lever arm like atlatl spear. So in East they used more recurved type of bows and used a lot of horns and composite material. They glued them together with animal glue and so on. Then if we look to the west, to the North American plains, the Native Americans on those big plains used sword bows, and they used typically quite of little brothers to the longbows nowadays. So the limb structure was straight and quite flat, more or less, and they used wood. Typical wood was Osage orange, and then they put animal sinew backing to the bow to give more strength and speed. But because of the short and straight structure, the draw length was really short, and the techniques how they shot it is different compared to the East, where they used quite long draw even with those short recurved bows. And because of the structure which looked like a longbow and the function which were similar than the longbows, they nowadays called them many times as short bows, meaning that they are short and also the draw length is shorter. But how I see them, those all were horse bows used on horseback. There were also same type of flat bows before the horse cultures, and also after them they are called as flat bows. The grip is primitive, but the shape of the limb is more flatter than modern longbows, at least. Then the English longbow, that is whole different story. You see, in the Middle Ages, between the war of England and France, it came popular. And the English longbow, you can only make this one type of bow if you want it to be English longbow. And it is made of one solid wood. Typically the original wood is yew, and the length of the bow was really long. It was 74 inch long and higher, and they were really strong bows. The draw could be more than 100 pounds. 150 pounds were really common to have in those war bows. And the arrows were big, heavy war arrows, and they were like ballistic guns. They shoot a lot of arrow range against the enemy, and the impact of the heavy arrow was which made the penetration very good. Compared to the horse bows, they were fastest bows. Even nowadays they are quite fastest bows available because of the structure, and then because they use a little bit lighter and sharp arrows, and they shoot more straight. So typical tactics for warfare was hit and run. So they galloped against enemy and shoot rapidly arrows, and then they turned away and shot back shots still. So in English longbows they used heavy arrows and ballistic type of tactic, and in horse bows they used straight and fast arrows to make the penetration good enough. So it's like ballistic guns today against the machine guns and pistols. So primitive bows and horse bows were quite together, and then in the Middle Ages the English longbow was very popular, but it is so clumsy in horseback, so it was only for foot soldiers. Then, which is really interesting what comes to the primitive bows, that many of you don't know that even in Finland, here in up north, they have found some original Finnish bows, they are called Sami bows or Finnish archery bows. They have found some of those bows from swamps, so that's how they know what was the shape and style. And what is interesting, they were kind of flat bows or long bows. They were pretty long, but at the end of the limbs they were sias. And what is also unique in Sami bow, they used birch bark, and they wrapped around the birch bark to the limbs, and that protects the limb and the glues used in the limb for the climate. Because you see here in up north, it can be summer quite hot, and then on winter time it can be really freezing cold and really dry weather. So the bark of the birch were protecting the limbs. But there are some parts which are similar in horse bows and some similar than in flat bows. So it's interesting thing. In the 1930s in America they developed this modern longbow. That's why it is called also as American flatbow or American longbow, to make separate from English longbow. And it was the Mr. Howard Hill who was making the American longbow and the modern longbow very popular back in old days. And then after that American longbow, they developed these modern recurve bows. So the recurve bows in hunting and the modern competition, they are the latest inventions in traditional bow history. But in traditional way, there was first primitive bows, different kinds, then they came the horse bows beside those primitive bows. Then there was English longbow in Middle Ages, and then 1930s they invented this American flatbow, which is the modern longbow nowadays we use. And then they developed this recurve. One popular name is of course the Fred Bear, who used a lot of recurve bows and made it very popular in hunting. But that's about the history. Then shortly the measurements. The pound, the bow strength, how much do you pull, how heavy the bow is, it is measured with pounds. And usually the bows are measured from 28-inch of draw, because average people draw that much. In horse bows, many bowyers use 30-inch or 32-inch of draw to measure how heavy and how strong the bow is. But the most common is to measure it from 28 inches. And for example, it is marked in the bow as 40 pounds at 28 inches. That is how you know how heavy the bow is. The weight of the arrow and the arrow tip and the bow is measured as grains. So 1 grain is 0.065 grams. So it's really tiny unit, but that's how it is. So pounds, inches and grains, which are those units used in archery. And the speed of arrow is measured as foot per second. How many foot per second the arrow is flying, that's the speed, how they measure it. How do you know what is your own draw length? The easiest way to measure it is to put a stick or arrow between your hands and the other end of the stick in the middle of your chest, and then hold the stick or the arrow and reach as far as you can, and then measure how long it is from the tip of your finger to the chest. That is your draw length, fast way measured and approximately measured. More exact way to measure your own draw length is after you know how to shoot and after you find your optimal draw length where you pull back your string, then you should use assistant, for example, to measure the length between from the string to the point where the arrow is on the same level than the back side of the bow. So your full draw and then the measurements from the string to the bow's back. That is the exact draw length of yours. And when you buy arrows, you usually want to add 1 inch or 2 inches more to the arrow length. That's for the safety reasons, that you don't accidentally pull more and then shoot your own wrist because of too short arrow. So that's important to know. And why your own draw length is also important is that you can then buy a correct bow to your own strength. So if the bow is reported to be, for example, for 40 pounds at 28 inches, and if you are short-handed or short person and your own maximum draw length is, for example, 27 inches, then you need to understand that if you buy a 40 pound bow from the shop, you are pulling less than 40 pounds. Usually the poundage is changing 3 to 5 pounds per inch of draw length. So meaning if the bow is on the shop 40 pounds at 28 and you pull 29, you can pull it 43 or 45 pounds of draw. And if you pull less, for example 27, then you pull from the same bow only 35 or 37 pounds. So that is important if you want exact draw weight for your own draw length. You need to think and find out in what length the buyer has measured the draw weight of the bow. The common rule how to pick correct weight to the bow is that you should be able to pull the bow back in your own full draw and keep it about 10 seconds without struggling and shaking and pain, and then shoot one accurate shot from that same hold. That is good rule for beginner to choose the proper draw weight to your bow. Easiest is if you go to the archery shop or archery club and test different bows and choose your own draw weight. In hunting, in some part of the world there are some laws and rules. For example, in Finland it needs to be 40 pounds of draw if you want to go and hunt with the bow. So I think there was a lot of talking for one video. I hope you found it interesting and maybe useful, especially if you are a beginner. Now that we understand the bow structure and how the bows are working and what kind of effects the limbs are giving us, then in next video I will talk you about the arrows and the arrow structure and how the arrow works and what kind of measurements and effects there are when you shoot different arrows. And understanding these both it is the key how to learn to shoot accurate way with different kind of techniques, and especially for to use correct technique for your bow and your arrow type. So that is coming next. In this point I thank you for watching if you were watching, and if you liked my video, please subscribe and give some thumbs up, and if you have some questions, put comments below the video. I wish you a nice day, be safe, shoot straight and keep it instinctive. See you next time. Bye.